Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf. Today, we resume our immersive journey through Dharma Talks by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Jeffrey Degraff. Join us as we delve deeper into these profound teachings. Crafted meticulously by the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf, this audiobook is a vessel to share the wisdom of the Buddha. Your support in amplifying these teachings is invaluable. Subscribe, like, and share to expand the reach of these transformative insights. Together, let's cultivate a world enriched by the Buddha's guidance. Relax, absorb, and allow these teachings' essence to resonate within you as our enlightening exploration continues. Let's start with today's reading. Skillful Thinking. September 2001. It's very common when we come to the practice that we bring along some very strong notions of who we are or the kind of person we'd like to be. I'm this sort of person. I want to be this sort of person. This type of thinking is very common. And yet it's not all that helpful, because that concept of who we are is very nebulous, based on all kinds of information and misinformation. It often gets in the way of what's the best thing to do at any given moment. This is why the Buddha says to put those questions aside. Who am I? Who am I going to be? Who have I been in the past? Not only in their philosophical, abstract or metaphysical sense, but also in their psychological sense. Just look at what opportunities you have right here, right now for thinking, acting and speaking in skillful ways. That kind of question, what's the most skillful thing to do right now, is a useful question. This is what the Buddha was getting at when he said to put thoughts of me, myself, what I have been, what I will be aside, and to think instead in terms of the Four Noble Truths. These truths give you a way of looking at experience that focuses directly on the issue of skillfulness. In other words, you look at your experience in terms of four variables: cause and effect on the one hand, and skillful and unskillful on the other. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering and stress, is an unskillful result. The unskillful cause is craving and ignorance. On the other side, you've got the path of practice. That's a skillful cause with the cessation of suffering as its result. So when situations present themselves to you, just ask yourself, what's the most skillful thing to do right here? Then allow yourself to think outside the box a little bit. The teachings of meditation are not necessarily there to just be followed. 1, 2, 3, 4 and bingo. There you are. Bliss. Oneness. Awakening. You've got to keep reflecting on what you're doing, what results are coming, what adjustments have to be made. If things don't seem to be working out, use your ingenuity. Of course, there are some general parameters in which you have to stay. When you're practicing meditation, you want to stay in the present as much as possible. So, what do you have to do to stay in the present? Sometimes the mind just refuses to settle down. So you find other topics aside from the breath in the present moment to focus on. If you're really having trouble focusing on the present, think of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Those topics help foster conviction in the path and in your own ability to practice the path. After all, the members of the Noble Sangha are human beings just like you. They started out with all the strengths and weakness you have, and somehow they were able to use those strengths to overcome those weaknesses in the face of all kinds of odds. If they could do it, so can you. Think in those ways for a while until you feel more confident in yourself and in the path, and then you can get back to your practice. Or, if you find yourself getting complacent and lazy, you can think about death for a while, because death can come at any time. It's right here in your breath. If you breathe in and can't breathe out, that's death. If you breathe out and can't breathe in, that's death too. Then you notice the way you breathe. Normally you breathe into a point where it's not comfortable to keep on breathing in anymore, so you stop and then start breathing out. You continue breathing out until you reach a point where it's no longer comfortable, and then you breathe in. You keep running into that point of the pain and discomfort each time you breathe and have to change from an out breath to an in breath, or an in breath to an out. That point of discomfort may not be blatant pain, but it's a sense of tension. It's got the breath hemmed in right there all the time. If the events of the past few days have confirmed anything, they've shown how fragile everything can be. Death comes very easily. A little clot gets the wanderlust in your bloodstream, starts wandering on, and then decides it's going to settle down, gets lodged in a capillary in your brain, a capillary in your heart, and that's it. Your whole system shuts down. Or some strange vagrant germ can find its way into your body, and that can be it, too. Death can come from the tiniest things. The body is so fragile. So the question is, have you completed the work you want to complete? Do you have any idea of what work you do want to complete? Okay, when you figure that one out, you can get to work and do it. The most important work, of course, is straightening out your mind, because that's what you're going to take with you whether you live or die. So if you find yourself being complacent, think about death for a while until it gives you the incentive to get back to the practice. In other words, take what's close at hand and use it as a tool. Don't believe the rule that meditation can't involve thinking. Sometimes you do have to think in ways that will bring you back to the present moment. Some people complain about the Buddha's teachings on past lives and future lives, that they're a distraction from the present, but when he talks about past lives and future lives, he keeps coming down to the principle of karma. That all the past, all the future, everything is shaped by your choices. Okay, what choices are you responsible for right now? The ones in the present moment. He gives you the teachings on what shapes the past and future in order to bring you back to the present with an even greater sense of its importance. So there are times when you have to use thinking, skillful thinking, in order to get past negative thinking. If you find that the narratives in your life, the issues in your life, are just too sticky to let go of easily, then use your powers of thinking in skillful ways to get you around those narratives so you can come back to the present moment with the proper context. So you make use of what you've got. That's a sign of discernment. Discernment isn't built except by using it, exercising it. No matter how strong or weak it is, you've got to take what you've got and put it to use if you want it to get stronger. It's like your body. If you sit and wait for it to get strong on its own without exercising it, it's going to waste away. So even as you're just getting started in the meditation, you have the chance to use your discernment, strengthen your discernment, by learning to deal with distraction. There are lots of ways for dealing with distraction. One is just to catch yourself wandering off and bring yourself back. Another way is to reflect on the drawbacks of that distraction. If you kept thinking in that direction, where would it take you? Is that where you want to go? Or if the distraction is really insistent, tell yourself, okay, the distraction can stay there in the background if it wants to, but I'm going to stay here with the breath in the foreground. Consciously. Ignore it. Don't get involved. It's like a glob of tar. If you even try to push yourself away, you get stuck. Some thoughts are like that. Other thoughts involve tension in the body. When you detect that it tends to think in that way, just relax the tension associated with the thought, and it'll go away. There are all kinds of ways of dealing with distraction. Don't feel that you only have one tool. You've got to use all kinds of tools because there are all kinds of distraction. Each time an issue comes up in the mind, stop and ask yourself, okay, what's the most skillful thing to do here? And if an immediate answer doesn't come, try experimenting. How do you think the Buddha found the path? Through experimentation. And even after he set out his teachings for people to hear, each person has had to experiment to see which way the teachings are best applied in his or her particular circumstances. If you don't have this willingness to experiment, to make mistakes and learn from them, you're going to have a hard time making progress in the path. That's what they mean by beginner's mind. Being open to the possibility that maybe the only way you're going to learn here is to make a few mistakes. Once you start learning from them, okay, then you become wise. So the basic questions are, always, what's the most skillful thing to do here? What exactly is the problem? What tools do I have? And then work from there. You don't have to get involved in such questions as who's creating the solution, who's facing the problem. Just put those thoughts out of your mind, and you'll find that the practice begins to progress, simply because you're not carrying a lot of unnecessary baggage around. Keep things simple. September 2001. When you meditate while listening to a Dhamma talk, don't listen to the talk. Focus on the meditation as much as you can. Give it 99% of your attention. Leave only a sliver of attention for the talk. The whole purpose of the talk here is not to distract you from the meditation, but to act as a fence, so that when the mind leaves the breath it runs into the talk and turns back to the breath. If anything in the talk is relevant to what you're doing in your meditation, it will come right in, echoing through your mind, without your having to try to pay attention to it. And if it's not relevant to what you're doing, you don't want it, anyhow. It may be relevant for somebody else. If it's not relevant for anybody in the room, it's probably for the speaker. So leave the talk alone and focus as much as you can on the breath going in and going out. And put out of your mind all thoughts about how the last meditation went or yesterday's meditation went or how it was last week. Just focus on what you've got right here, right now. This is an important element in the practice. That you drop any concerns about how good or bad things have been in the past. Those concerns get in the way of the present moment. The same holds true for any anticipation about how you hope today's meditation will be. It gets in the way of what you're doing right now. Meditation is a doing, you know. All too often we're looking for an experience. We want to experience this sense of ease, that sense of pleasure. But the Buddha's focus in the practice is on being skillful in doing, keeping mindful, keeping alert, being ardent in the practice, finding a sense of just right. When they talk about the middle way, the middleness lies in the amount of effort. That's just right for where you are right now, which sometimes may require a lot of effort, sometimes just a little bit. You supply whatever kind of effort is required. That's the kind of mental attitude you want to have. You're up for whatever is needed. And you need to have a sense of what can be done right now. Sometimes you realize, okay, just a bare amount of concentration, a bare amount of mindfulness is all you can manage, so you stick with that. Don't throw it away simply because it's not up to your standards. As Ajahn Lee says, big things come from little things, and sometimes very tiny victories can add up. You stay with this breath and then with the next breath and then the next. And even though you may not feel all that settled or secure, it's better than getting upset and saying, well, gee, this isn't amounting to anything, this is horrible, and then spinning out of control. Take things one step at a time, whatever the step that's required. If it requires you to step up high, okay, you step up high. If it's simply a step along smooth ground, okay, you can step along smooth ground. But you take whatever step is needed, and whether it matches your idea of where you'd like to be right now, that's not the issue. The issue is that you're here, you're doing what's required, you're doing the best that can be done in this situation. And as you stay with these little tiny steps, they begin to take on more depth, more strength, more solidity. If you measure them against your idea of how you'd like things to be, you tend to throw them away. If you keep throwing things away, what do you have left? Nothing at all. Concentration starts out in little, tiny bits and pieces, which may not seem like much, but they're better than nothing at all. A lot of the skill lies in learning how to stay with those bits and pieces. That's all you have to do, just stay with them. They may not be impressive, they may not have lots of flashing lights or whatever you've experienced in the past, but they're the beginning, they're the seeds. If you stay with them, if you nourish them, they grow. That's the sign of a discerning person. You make the most of what you've got. It may be a lot or it may be a little, but it's what you've got. It may change from day to day, so be alert to that, be sensitive to that. Accept whatever difficulties there may be in the situation and do the best you can. So take whatever concentration you have. If it seems like a little, don't berate it for being a little. Just work with it. Whatever sense of ease you can get out of the breathing, just stick with that. Even if it doesn't seem to be the most wonderful breath you've ever had, well, okay, work with what you've got because these things do develop. If you give them time, they develop. If you got a fruit on the tree, even if it's just a little, tiny, hard, green fruit, you keep watering the roots, fertilizing the soil, looking after the causes, and the results will take care of themselves. Try to keep your efforts right here. In other words, don't think about the past, don't anticipate the future. What you've got will then have a chance to grow. It's a very simple principle, but we tend to forget it. But it's by keeping things simple that the meditation works. Look at the questions the Buddha has us ask. They're very simple questions. Where's the stress right now? And before you get to the stress, ask, where can the mind settle down? If the mind hasn't settled down, if it has no sense of ease, you can't see anything clearly. So sometimes the only place it can settle down is with an ordinary feeling of okayness someplace in the body. Stick with that, and then as things begin to grow, as they begin to get more solid and still, stick with the simple questions. Where is the stress here? It's a question a 7-year-old can answer. At least, a 7-year-old can get his or her mind around it. So work with that. There are stories of arahants at the time of the Buddha who were 7 years old. They weren't dealing with any abstruse philosophical issues, they were just dealing very clearly with what was going on in their minds. The questions were simple enough for them to comprehend, and they were happy to stick with those simple questions. Where is their stress? What are you doing that's unnecessary and contributing to that stress? When you can see, just drop it. That way your powers of perception get more and more precise, more and more subtle. But the essential question stays the same on each level of subtlety. So if we keep things simple, the meditation becomes a lot more manageable. And it's this simple sort of questioning that helps see through the mind's subterfuges. The mind sometimes has a tendency to get more and more abstract and to want to deal with really fancy-sounding thoughts. It's like the emperor's new clothes. The person who's willing to say, "I don't understand this doesn't make any sense," can usually rip right through a lot of subterfuge, a lot of denial. The things we think we understand, the things we think we know, or at least we want to give the impression that we know. We have to learn to look behind them. Ask those simple questions. Is that really so? Do you really know that for sure? What does that really mean? Is that a really helpful way to think? Just keep asking these really simple, direct questions, and they'll help clear up a lot of confusion in the mind. Your true responsibility. September-October 2001. The very first time I went to stay with Ajahn Fuang, there was another young monk, a young man from Bangkok who had just ordained. His was one of those ordinations that had been forced on him by his fiancée. She had told him, "If you don't ordain for a couple of weeks, I don't want to marry you." So he ordained as a monk for a couple of weeks and discovered that he liked it a lot more than he had anticipated. The day before he was to return to Bangkok, he was beginning to doubt whether he wanted to return to lay life. That night Ajahn Fuang gave a Dhamma talk on how when you come into this world you don't come alone. You have your parents, you have other people who nursed you through life, raised you up, and so you have responsibilities to them. The next day the young man went off, and a few days later disrobed in Bangkok. About a week later, I was beginning to feel bad about being a monk. I felt that I was being selfish and just looking out after myself. That night Ajahn Fuang gave a Dhamma talk about how when you come into this world you come alone. You're responsible for your own birth, you're responsible for your own actions, and you're going to be responsible for how you die. Of course, these two contradictory messages simply showed how Ajahn Fuang could adapt his teachings to the needs of his audience. But of the two, I think the second teaching was ultimately the more true. When you come right down to it, there's a part of you that's totally alone as you come into the world, totally alone as you face your sufferings, totally alone as you leave here. Even when you are with other people, there's an internal dialogue that's just between you and yourself. That's what you've got to be responsible for. The world would be a nice place if we could provide for each other's happiness, and we can a little bit, but for the really deep down parts, we each have to be responsible for ourselves. If you constantly worry about this person and that person, no matter how close you are to them, There's going to be a part of you that gets neglected that you really are responsible for. This is a lot of what the Buddha's teaching is about. That you've got to take responsibility for yourself. Because who's making the decisions? You can't say, well, someone else made that decision for me or this person made that decision for me, because there's got to be a part of you that decides to go along with those decisions for whatever reasons. So you have to look at those reasons. This is not to say that believing what other people say is bad. The Buddha never said that, but he says you have to take what other people say and look at what your mind says, and then examine both very carefully to see which is more appropriate, which really does correspond more closely to the way things are, the way things should be, the most skillful way of reacting to a particular set of circumstances. If you don't develop your own powers of mindfulness and alertness in these areas, your judgment is going to be clouded, and that's going to cloud your life. So this is your first responsibility right here. And fortunately we do have the example of the Buddha to show us how it's done. When we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, it's not that the Buddha is going to come down and do things for us. It means that he's given us an example of how people make their own decisions wisely, skillfully. If you stop to think about the story of his life, it's amazing. He did one of the things society really comes down hardest on. He left his wife right after she'd given birth to a child. I can't think of any society anywhere in the world that condones that. And yet this is what he felt he had to do at that point. It turned out ultimately that his decision was right. He was able to come back and offer something priceless to his wife and to his child. Nibbana, arahantship. In the Therigatha there's a poem attributed to his wife, in which she says that all the suffering was worth it because he showed her how to be responsible for herself and to settle all her internal issues as well. The same goes for Rahula. He was able to settle all his issues too. That's the highest gift you can give to other people, and you can't give it to them unless you've been able to settle all your issues first. So this is where your first responsibility lies. Straighten out the affairs in your own mind, and then you're in a position to be an example to others, to actually explain things to others in a way that they can benefit from. So when you're meditating, this is precisely what you're doing. You're taking on responsibility for your own mind. We're not sitting here waiting for someone to come in and inspire us or for some light to come floating in that will suddenly clear things up for us. We have to do the work. This is what the teaching on skillfulness is about. If there's any one issue central to the Buddha's teachings, it's the issue of skillfulness. How do you develop a skill? All of his teachings revolve around that question. Take the Four Noble Truths. They deal with suffering and the end of suffering. What do you do to bring about the end of suffering? In other words, how do you arrange the issues in your mind skillfully so that they no longer lead to suffering? Even the Buddha's teaching on causality can be compared to modern theories about learning. He tells precisely why it is that people are able to learn. There are feedback loops you can learn from. You've got the quality of attention in your mind that focuses on this, focuses on that, asks questions, frames issues so that you can work on them. This is not the rote feedback of a thermostat. There's an element of attention and intention in there as well, all of which explains why we are able to learn. It's because we are able to learn that the teaching is useful for us. The Buddha teaches us how to frame our own questions. As we get more and more skillful about it, we begin to get a better and better sense of which questions in life are worth focusing on, and which ones are best left aside, which ones are really important, and which ones are only secondary. So when you're meditating, part of the issue is learning how to answer the proper questions. Why can't I see things clearly in my own mind? Why is everything a mess? Because the mind's not quiet enough. What do you do to make it more quiet? Work on this question. Then as the mind begins to settle down, what can you do when it attains a state of stillness? What have you done to get here? What do you do to keep here? As you get more and more stable in that particular level of stillness, is there still a level of suffering or stress in here? When the mind is really still, the word suffering doesn't really apply, but there is stress. Where is it? What goes along with it? So the Buddha's teaching focuses on how to frame questions, for only when you frame the questions can you learn. That's why you look at your own mistakes, honestly and truly. The Buddha's first requisite, in setting out the criteria for the type of person he was willing to teach, was someone who is honest and no deceiver. In other words, someone who will recognize his or her own mistakes, admit them, and be willing to learn from them. You have to be able to ask, okay, what went wrong here? You start from the outside and then you take that question deeper and deeper into the mind. You begin to realize how many features of the mind's landscape are not given, but are actually the result of choices you have made. You begin to develop a sensitivity for which choices are skillful and which ones are not. Your inner landscape becomes a lot more malleable than you thought it could be. When you ask the right questions, everything gets turned around for the better. We're working on these two qualities needed to learn: intention and attention. The intention right now is to be mindful. Get the mind to settle down. Attention is watching. Is the intention really working or not? If it's not, what can you do to make it work better? This way you learn how to bring these two qualities closer and closer together, more and more clearly, as the mind grows more and more still. You can start making better choices. Then, as your level of skill grows really great, you can go beyond even right choices. Things genuinely begin to open up in the mind. You see that what the Buddha taught about is really there. There really is a deathless. There really is an unconditioned. When you get there, you realize that your own actions were what got you there. But at that point, even the sense of you doesn't even exist. But that doesn't matter, because what is there is the ultimate happiness, the ultimate well-being. You know what lead to it. That's what can be taught to other people. You do this, you do that. This is what worked when you're talking in this way. You're talking with confidence. It's not just something you read in a book, not some theory you've dreamed up. It's something that actually worked inside you. Once you find something that worked inside you, you really have something special to offer other people. Your companionship with them is not just the kind of companionship that's desperately trying to make up for the big hole of loneliness that each of us tends to carry around inside. You've been able to work through that lonely hole in yourself, so it's not lonely anymore. It's no longer a hole. You're coming from a sense of fullness. That's when you have something really outside of the ordinary to share with people. So this is what's meant by taking responsibility for yourself, for that gnawing sense inside that something is wrong, something is lacking. You look into it to see exactly where it is. You discover that what it comes down to is a huge lack of attention, lack of awareness of what's going on inside, a kind of a bewilderment. The Buddha said that's one of the two ways we react to suffering. First, there's a sense of bewilderment. How does this happen? Then there's a search for somebody else to help show you the way out. Most of us put those two qualities together in very unskillful ways. But when you learn how to put them together in a skillful way, bewilderment turns into articulate questions. The search for someone who can help focuses on someone who can really act as an example for what you can do. You've got the Buddha, the noble Sangha. So once you take those two qualities of bewilderment and search and begin to use them skillfully, you get to the point where you really have ended the problem of suffering in the mind in all of its manifestations. From that point on, when you're looking to other people, you're not looking for them to solve your suffering for you. Instead, you're in a position where your presence is a gift to them. You can do your best to help them to turn their own bewilderment and search in skillful directions. But the help can be really helpful only when you've taken care of your issues first. Those are the issues you've been carrying around for you don't know how long. Those are the issues that each of us has been carrying around for eons and eons. And this is the only way to work through them. The burden in the mind finally gets lifted. That's when you've taken care of what really is your responsibility. From that point on, everything else is purely a gift. The Line of Fire. March 2002. So much of our suffering in life comes from putting ourselves in the line of fire. The body changes. Feelings change. Perceptions, thought constructs, consciousness. These things are always changing, and no matter how good they get, the goodness deteriorates. They're stressful, inconstant, not self. No matter how much we try to make them easeful, constant, and self, they just can't quite make the grade. And when we put ourselves in them with our sense of identification, this is me, this is mine, and we hang on, then we're putting ourselves in the line of fire. It's like they're shooting arrows all the time, and we position ourselves right in the way. So what should we do? Our life is just these things we experience. Our whole experience of the world is form, feelings, perceptions, fabrications, consciousness. We live with these things, so we have to learn how to live with them without getting in the line of fire. We don't try to run away from them, but we learn how to let them go right through our range of awareness without snagging onto anything inside of us. In other words, we practice so that there's nothing inside of us for them to hit. Then it's like shooting through the air. There's a passage where Ven Moggallana compares his mind to space. He says that no matter how much you try to dye space trying to make it yellow, white, blue, or any other color, the dye just doesn't stick, for there's nothing there to stick to. That's the state of mind we should be working toward. In other words, instead of sucking these things in, laying claim to them, embracing them, holding on to them, saying, "This is me, this is mine," we learn to pry them from our grasp. The reason we hold on is because of our fear that if we don't hold on to them, we're going to fall down. It's like a little child learning to walk, afraid that if he doesn't hold on to his parent's hand, he'll fall down. In the beginning, that's the way it is when you're learning to walk, but there comes a point where you don't need to hold on, where you're strong enough to walk without assistance. This is what the training of the mind is all about. You learn how not to hold on, because it's when you don't hold on, there's no grasping. As Ajahn Lee says, when there's no grasping, there's no sweat in the palms of your hands. And when there's no holding, there's nothing that anybody can shoot, nothing that anybody can hit. The place where we hold on is where we get hit. When there's no holding on, the mind is like wide open space. You can shoot an arrow through space, but you can't shoot space. That's the quality we're trying to develop in the mind. Now, before we get there, we do have to learn how to hold on skillfully to skillful things, skillful activities, skillful qualities of mind. You might think of the path of practice as a ladder. You go up rung by rung by rung. You can't get to the higher rungs without first holding on to the lower rungs. And before you can let go of a lower rung, you have to have another, higher rung to hold on to. Your right hand is holding on to one rung, so the left hand can let go of a lower rung and go up to a higher rung. Then you hold on with your left hand so that the right hand can let go and reach to a higher one, back and forth like this. You've got to hold on. In other words, there are the precepts, there's concentration, there's discernment. You have to hold on to these things to get to where you want to go. Suppose you have a ladder and you want to get up on the roof. You have to hold on to the rungs of the ladder, one after another, until you're securely on the roof. There's nothing above you but sky. Then you let go. The other traditional image is taking a raft across the river. We all like the end of this story where the Buddhist says that when you get to the other side of the river, you don't have to carry the raft around anymore. The person who takes the raft and carries it on his head as he walks further. That's not the right approach at all. When you get to the other side, you just leave the raft on the shore, and you can walk on without any assistance. But while you're crossing over the river, you need that raft, you've got to hold on. If you don't, you fall into the water and get swept away. So the trick is learning to give the mind something really good to hold on to, so that it doesn't go out holding on to other things, grasping after other things, thinking it has to depend on this or that person, this or that thing that will end up sweeping it away. And what we're developing here, they seem so ordinary, these qualities of mind. Take virtue, for instance. Virtue is not just following the precepts, but it's a quality of mind that's solid in its intentions. You make up your mind that you're going to avoid evil, and then you just stick with that intention. That's the essence of virtue. The word sila in Pali is related to the word sela, which means rock. In other words, there's a solidity to that intention that you hold on to. You don't let it go. Initially it may not seem like much, but you find that as you really hold on to these intentions not to harm, not to harm, not to harm, it really protects the mind from a lot of things. You learn not only not to harm people outside, but you also learn how not to harm yourself. And as you don't harm yourself, you find resources of strength in your mind that you wouldn't have guessed at otherwise. Because as long as the mind is harming itself, it keeps sapping its own strength, thinking in ways that get it depressed, thinking in ways that get it fearful, that just drain its strength away. So when you learn to give up those habits, you find resources of strength inside that you wouldn't have anticipated. You can hold on to them. The same with concentration. The ability to keep the mind on one object, using mindfulness, using alertness, which are really basic mental skills. Again, in the beginning they seem unremarkable. How could you base your happiness on little things like this? You might think. But you find that when you really do devote yourself to developing them and you give them priority, then they're right there when you need them, when aging comes, when illness comes, when death comes. These are the things that will be able to help you. I was often struck by this fact when I looked through funeral books in Thailand. There, most monasteries have loads and loads of books in their bookcases that were published at funerals. It's a custom over there, a way of making merit. Publish a book at a funeral and dedicate the merit to the person who's passed on. A lot of good Dhamma books have been printed that way. Now, most of the books, as a preface, will have a little biography of the person who passed away. And they always come to that part of the person's life if the person didn't die of an accident where they say, and this little symptom here, which at first was just a little annoyance, started getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the person had to finally go to see the doctor, and the doctor said, "It's this disease." And the doctors did their very best, but there came a point where the doctors had to throw up their hands and say, "That's as far as we can help you." And so what does a person do then? If the person doesn't have these skills of mind, he or she is totally at sea. But if you've been meditating, you know what to do. You're mindful of the breath, you're mindful not to give in to the unskillful mental states, and you're alert to what's going on in the mind, so as soon as you catch it latching on to anything unskillful, you let go. Anything unskillful, anything that would weigh the mind down, you learn to let go, let go. And when the time comes to let go of the body, okay, you've practiced that. You're prepared. Ajahn Fuang always said, meditation is learning how to die, learning how to let go of the things you've been holding on to for so long, and realizing you don't have to. There's the fear that if we let go of these things we're going to be totally lost, but no, that's not the case at all. When you let go of the body, you find that that's not the end. You let go of your concerns, you let go of your worries, and you're actually much lighter. There's a dimension to the mind that just doesn't die, and if you're really alert and mindful and you're letting go, you can find it. Even if you're not that alert, at least you protect the mind from falling into bad mental states, and this guarantees a good passing, a good transition. So these little skills, being alert, being mindful, they're enough to really help you if you really hold on to them. The same with discernment. Develop your ability to see where is there stress. That's the big issue in discernment, the Buddha said. Where is there stress in the mind? What are you doing that causes stress? Can you learn how to stop doing that, learn how to let it go? We feel like we've got to let go of the stress, but that's not what will free you of stress. You comprehend stress. You let go of the craving. You let go of the cause, and the stress goes on its own. So the meditation is about learning to look for that craving, learning to catch the mind as it's causing stress through its cravings, through its ignorance. And once you catch the mind in the act, you let go of that act and the craving behind it. But as long as you still haven't gone all the way to the end, you hold on to that ability to ask the right questions about what's going on in your mind right now. Where am I causing myself stress right now? Where is the stress unnecessary? What do I stop doing so that the stress can come to an end? Keep that question in mind. Other questions you let go, But these are the questions you have to keep in mind. So you find as you hold on to virtue, concentration, discernment that these qualities get you across. If you hold on to them, you can let go of everything else. You can think of awareness as like a big screen, like the screen on a window. Anything can go right through. Anything that comes at you can go right through. You don't catch hold of it, you don't latch onto it, you don't put yourself in the line of fire. And so you find that you have this sense of spacious well-being that comes from being open, but without the dangers and wounds that come from opening yourself up to other things by putting yourself in the line of fire. And you find this way, that as you're not shooting yourself or putting yourself in the line of fire, the mind has strengths you wouldn't have anticipated, whole reservoirs of strength that you can draw on when you need them. So don't let the mind indulge in things that would drain its strength. Don't weigh yourself down, because if you weigh yourself down with unnecessary things, it's like weighing down the body. You carry lots of burdens on your shoulders all the time, and no wonder you don't have the strength to do anything else. When you put down the burdens, you find that there's lots of strength there in the mind that you hadn't realized. So hold on to these practices: virtue, concentration, discernment, because if you hold on to them, you don't have room in your hands to hold on to unskillful things. You find yourself letting go of all kinds of unskillful things you never even knew you were holding on to. And there's no sense of loss. Sometimes there may be a sense of fear around the idea of letting go of certain things because you think you need them. But when you subtly realize, hey, you don't, it can be surprising, not only in how much you can let go of, but also in how much stronger you are in the letting go. And then when you've let go of all the unskillful things in the mind, that's when you can let go of the path, leave the raft on the shore. That's when the mind is totally free. But until then, you want to maintain that sense of commitment to the path, because if you commit yourself to the path, you'll find that it's committed to you. It will be there for you when you need it. It's not like ordinary commitments in the world where you give all your time and energy. And whoops, there it goes, you get let down. These things don't let you down. We've got the Buddha's word on that. We've got the word of all of his noble disciples to guarantee it. If you look after the path will look after you, all the way to the point where you don't need it anymore. And it won't get upset when you finally put it aside. The Pursuit of True Happiness. March 2002. The practice of the Buddha's teaching can be called the serious pursuit of true happiness, with the emphasis on the serious and the true. Serious not in the sense of grim, but in the sense of sincere, unwilling to settle for anything less than genuine. True here means a happiness that doesn't change, a happiness that doesn't let you down. This is why so many of the Buddha's teachings focus on suffering, because most of the happiness or the things that we take for happiness in daily life really do end up causing suffering as they change. So many times the happiness we gain turns into something else. And of the happiness that turns into pain, the Buddha asked, is it a noble thing to search for that kind of happiness? Is it a wise, skillful thing to search for that kind of happiness as an end in and of itself? If you know it's going to let you down at some point, why put so much effort into it? That's the question he asked himself. That's the question that led him to go off into the wilderness to find if there was a true happiness that could be gained through human effort. This is why we regularly chant the chant on aging, illness, death, and separation. These 4 reflections are what led the Buddha to go out into the wilderness. They gave him a feeling of samvega, a sense of dismay over the way of ordinary life, the pointlessness of so many things that we do. Samvega also implies a sense of urgency in wanting to find a way out. If his reflections had stopped right there, though, they would have been very depressing, but there's also the 5th reflection that gave the Buddha the encouragement to go, that gave rise to a sense of passaddha, or confidence. Whatever we do for good or for evil, to that will we fall heir. Is there a skillful way of action, he asked himself, that could lead beyond this constant wandering on, this constant gaining and losing, coming together and falling apart, that's so typical of our ordinary lives? After the course of 6 years of earnest experimenting, he found that, yes, there is a way. That way was what he taught for the rest of his life, The one message that was so important that it was worth giving his whole life to. That the search for true happiness is not a futile search. He noticed that when we run up against suffering, when we run up against all the problems of our lives, there are two reactions. One is a sense of bewilderment. Why is this happening? Often. Why is this happening to me? And then there's a search. Is there someone who knows a way out? And because they go together, the bewilderment and the search, oftentimes we look in the wrong places because we're confused about what happiness is, what suffering is. So when he taught the Four Noble Truths, he said, with regard to the first truth, this is the task you want to accomplish. To comprehend suffering, to understand what's creating such a burden on the mind. He had discovered that there are two kinds of suffering. The stress and the changefulness in things in life, but also the unnecessary stress and suffering we cause ourselves over those changes. That's the issue, because once that second suffering is wiped out, the changes don't impinge on the mind at all. As in Ajahn Suwat's teaching that I've repeated many times, the mountain over there on the eastern horizon, is it heavy? He would ask. And his answer would be, if you try to pick it up, yes. If you don't try to pick it up, it's not heavy for you. It may be heavy in and of itself, but if you don't pick it up, it doesn't impinge on you. It's not an issue for you. The same principle applies to suffering in general. As we sit here, what demands are being placed on you? All that's being asked is that you sit relatively still for the hour, breathe, and watch the breath, stay with the breath. When the breath comes in, know that it's coming in. When it goes out, know that it's going out. Breathe as comfortably as you can. There are several ways of working with this. Try breathing deep and long for a while, and if you notice any parts of the body that are feeling tense with a long breath, try to relax them. Or you can change the rhythm of your breathing. Experiment to see what feels good right now. So often we allow ourselves to breathe in ways that are uncomfortable, and yet nobody's forcing us to do so. It's just that we're not paying attention. We don't usually think that there's anything there to pay attention to. Yet the energy of the breath is our basic energy in life. It stands to reason that if the breath energy is good, the body will be healthier, the mind will be more at ease. It will have a better place to stay. That's all that's asked of us, and yet we manage to develop 108 problems around it. There's pain in the legs, pain in the back. We can get all worked up about the pain, even though we know that as soon as we get up and change positions, the pain will go away. It's not harmful pain. It's not going to cause your leg to fall off or get gangrene or anything like that, and yet the mind can create all kinds of scenarios, torturing itself, tormenting itself. Or you can drag in things from the past, or worries about the future. Even this much can show you how clearly you create all sorts of unnecessary torment for yourself just sitting right here. The purpose of the meditation is to find out why, how it happens, and also how you can stop doing it, how you can drop these habits of the mind that cause so much unnecessary suffering. The easiest way to see these things is to go off and be alone, to find some seclusion. The texts talk about 3 types of seclusion: physical, mental, and seclusion from your mental baggage. For physical seclusion, you come out here to the monastery and you're basically alone. You don't deal with that many people. The burdens of constant social contact are cut away quite a bit. You're not totally alone, but during the course of the day when you're out under the trees, there you are, alone. That in and of itself lightens a lot of burdens on the body. That's just physical seclusion, though, because you find often that your mind isn't secluded. It's dragging in all kinds of events, past and future, to keep it company. Even when it's in the present, as the Buddha says, we live with craving as our companion. We want to feel this way, to think that way. Even if we don't want to think about these things, they come up and we grab hold of them out of habit. So the first step in gaining mental seclusion is to cut away past and future, and just be with the present moment. You use the breath as your anchor. When you're with the breath, you know you're in the present, and you have the tools for dealing with whatever discomfort arises there. You can breathe in ways that minimize suffering or actually become actively refreshing, satisfying, absorbing. You find with this simple act of staying with the breath as you stay with it longer and longer, trying to keep yourself as sensitive as possible to how the breathing feels, making a little adjustment here, a little adjustment there, that a sense of ease comes without your having to think about giving rise to it, apart from what you're doing with the breath. It's just there from the continuity of your focus, the sensitivity of your focus. There can even be a sense of rapture, a sense of fullness. You breathe in feeling really refreshed, breathe out feeling really refreshed. And the more you get absorbed in the present moment like this, the further away the past and the future seem to be. This is a step above simple physical seclusion, because you find that once you've learned how to recognize this centered spot and how to maintain it in this secluded place, you can test whether you can maintain it in other contexts as well. Get up and walk around. Can you maintain that same sense of being centered as you're walking, doing other work around the place, as you're talking with other people? This is where you see a lot of the tricks the mind plays on itself, worrying. What is that person thinking about me? How can I impress this person? Nobody here wants to be impressed, and yet everybody's trying to impress everyone else. When you learn how to drop those thoughts, how to stay centered while you're with others, you find that life is lighter both for yourself and for the people around you. You work step by step to try to maintain this same steady sense of center, whatever the context, whatever the situation, so that even when you're not in physical seclusion, the mind is secluded. It's no longer running after the future, running after the past. But it still has craving as its companion. That's the final level of seclusion. When you can get rid of your companionship with craving. The commentaries call this upadhi viveka, being secluded from the mind's acquisitions, or the mind's baggage. Your cravings, your clingings, your conceits, your ignorance. Dig into the present moment and find out exactly what's happening here. How is it that the mind can still create suffering and stress even when you're centered in the present moment? It's very subtle. At that point it's hard to call it suffering, it seems more like simple stress. But as you focus on what's happening, you begin to see. You're doing this, that's unnecessary, you're doing that's unnecessary, creating needless burdens for the mind. It's like a little child learning how to walk. When it first tries to walk, it moves not only its legs, but also its arms, and sometimes its head, stiffens up its neck. It gets all kinds of unnecessary muscles involved because it doesn't understand what's necessary and what's not. But as it gets more skilled at walking, more and more observant, it begins to see that it doesn't have to move its arms in that way, doesn't have to stiffen up its head in that way. It can begin to relax different parts of the body until walking is not such a major effort. The same with the meditation. As we center the mind, we realize after a while that we're doing all kinds of unnecessary things to keep it centered. To keep the mind strapped down in the present moment, we sometimes force it too much, sometimes thinking that we have to pull the breath here or pull the breath there, or force the mind here, or tense this here or tense that there. When you begin to realize that these things aren't necessary, you begin to let go. As you let go of those activities, the act of centering the mind becomes more natural. You're more at ease in the present moment and you get clearer and clearer about what you're doing. It's through peeling these layers away that you get to a point where ultimately you can let go of that companion here in the present moment, so that the mind is truly secluded. At that point it goes beyond even time and space. It touches another dimension. That's when you learn what it's like to be truly free of the stress and suffering you create for yourself. That's when you have your first taste of what it's like to find true happiness, true ease, true well-being. So the practice takes you step by step from all your entanglements and all this unnecessary suffering you cause yourself, peels them away, strips them away, layer by layer, until you find that what the Buddha taught was true. Yes, through your own efforts, you can come to the spot where the mind opens up to this other dimension that he calls deathless, free from aging, free from illness, free from death, free from separation. So even though the Buddha may often talk about stress and suffering, it's his first noble truth. It's the starting point for all four noble truths. These truths are aiming in the direction of true happiness. The four noble truths are there to test anything that's false. Like the touchstones they used in the past to test for true gold. You hold onto your stone to test everything that comes your way because you want the gold. Once you've got the gold, though, you can put the stone aside. So this is what we're here for. We have that chant, "May I be happy, may I be free from stress and pain." We chant that every night before the meditation to remind ourselves of why we're here. For true happiness. And it reminds us to look at all the things we do throughout the day that get in the way of that wish. It's one our most sincere wishes, and yet we're always doing things to block it, to get in its way. So try to keep this in mind. Keep checking, what are you doing that's getting in the way of true happiness? What are the unnecessary things you feel you just can't do without, that are a built-in part of your personality? They don't have to be. They may have deep roots, but they can be uprooted, these habits we have. We're working on the skills right now that can uproot them until we reach the point where we're not causing ourselves or the people around us any unnecessary stress or pain. It may sound simple. It may even sound small-minded and small-hearted for a spiritual goal, but if you actually follow the process, you see that it takes you beyond what you might have imagined. How true is true happiness? Well, follow the process, be sensitive, be observant, be ingenious in the practice, and you'll find out. As we conclude today's session, we extend an invitation for your ongoing involvement. Just as the Buddha encouraged sharing and supporting his teachings for the greater good, we implore you to join us. Assist in spreading these profound teachings universally by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Your engagement ensures these invaluable insights touch lives far and wide. Embrace this opportunity to ignite positive change and foster understanding. We eagerly anticipate your presence in future episodes, as together, we endeavor to illuminate minds and sow seeds of empathy across the globe.